Imagine this. It's a beautiful Seattle apartment and a couple sits on the couch. Except they are being surrounded by cameras watching their every move. They have blood pressure cuffs, they have skin monitors, they have heart rate monitors on, and they have an argument. They argue about something small, maybe who's going to do the dishes, or maybe something big like kids or money. And in watching that argument, researchers can predict with up to 90% accuracy if their relationship will last or if they're headed for a breakup. This is not fiction. This is the lab of psychologist Dr. John Gottman, called the Love Lab. And the reason that these researchers can figure out and predict the relationship breakup is because of how the couple's physiology responds to conflict and what they do that are red flags in conflict. Today, we're breaking down the three biggest predictors of breakups, and I'm also going to show you how you can lower stress and protect your relationship. The three biggest predictors of a breakup are your cortisol levels during conflict, your heart rate variability during conflict, and whether or not you commit what Dr. John Gottman calls the Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse. Four critical things that you can do in conflict that signal that the relationship is not in a good place. Okay, so, what's behind this idea? Back in the 1980s, Dr. John Gottman established what's called the Love Lab at the University of Washington. He invited real couples in and watched them interact with one another, sit on the couch, have a conversation, have a regular, day together. And sometimes they would have a fight and they would observe what the couples did, what they said, observe their physiological changes. And over decades, Gottman's team was able to discover patterns that predicted whether or not couples would stay together or divorce. And they were very accurate. Before I go on, hi. If you're new to the channel, I'm Victoria. I am a Yale trained clinician and science nerd looking to make health and relationships simple. Okay, let's move on. So let's talk about Gottman's work and other research that talks about predicting breakups. So Gottman's is the most famous, but there are many other researchers that have looked at relationships and looked at how couples interact with one another. So other relationships have studied stress hormones like cortisol or wearable data like heart rate variability, and they all point to the same thing. It's not whether you argue, because really every relationship has disagreements. It's more about how your body reacts to the argument and then how long it takes for that reaction, that stressful reaction, to calm down. That really predicts how your relationship will last and how you feel, how long it takes for that safety, for you to feel safe, for that safety to return. Okay, so let's start with cortisol. Cortisol is kind of like your stress thermometer. So this is your main stress hormone and it spikes in conflict or in stressful situations. That's really normal. That's exactly what we would expect. And it does really important things during conflict. So what else does cortisol do? Cortisol actually has a daily rhythm. Okay. So the reason you wake up in the morning is because your body releases cortisol around 6-ish a.m. If you're on a regular, you don't work nights. So around 6 a.m., it peaks, makes you wake up, and then it slowly transitions and is low through the day. It stays low at night. And then again, hopefully it stays low at night. And then again in the day, it rises again in the morning so that you can wake up, and it has that 24-hour cycle. So that's cortisol. But here's what researchers see in couples who fight more negatively. And we'll talk about what that means, fighting more negatively. But basically, that slope, that cortisol slope, flattens. Instead of coming down, that healthy rise in the morning and then coming down, the cortisol slope actually stays elevated. And that high pattern is not a good sign. So we never want the cortisol to be high all the time. It means your body isn't fully recovering from stress, which can make you feel more drained. It can make you feel inflamed and less resilient and more on edge. So what is happening here? When conflict makes your cortisol stay high, it means your body is still holding on to the conflict. It's like saying, I haven't really let this go yet. Why does that matter? It matters because chronically really high cortisol is linked to poor mood, poor sleep, inflammation, and eventually to relationship dissatisfaction. So the good news is that a single spike isn't going to be detrimental to your relationship. Remember, I talked about when you have a disagreement, when you are stressed, cortisol spikes happen. That's natural and normal. It's that high cortisol that stays high. What matters is how quickly you recover from that spike. Does your cortisol settle back to baseline? Does your body feel safe again? That's really the key. So, one example of this is, let's say you have a big argument. You have a big argument, you're really upset, and you don't really resolve things, and you go to sleep. So you go to sleep, you don't sleep well, you kind of toss and turn all night, you're in that light sleep. You wake up in the morning, you're really exhausted, you feel like you've been hit by a train, so tired, right? That's an example of that cortisol staying high. And instead of you having high melatonin and being and resting at night, cortisol is inhibiting that and really making you feel amped up all night and not letting you have deep restful sleep. What is another sign that your relationship might not be doing as well? That other sign is heart rate variability. So, HRV, or heart rate variability, those are the tiny variations in time between your heartbeats. Higher HRV usually means that your system is more flexible. You can shift from being stressed to being calm more easily. And lower HRV means that your system is not as flexible. And so your body is kind of stuck in that fight or flight mode. Studies show that during conflict, couples that have higher HRV, or couples whose HRV increases and decreases together, they're in sync, have better relationship satisfaction. When heart rate variability decreases during conflict, couples report having more disconnect and more stress in relationships. It's also not as simple as that. So HRV, in terms of the number, doesn't mean as much as what it does as your pattern over time. So let me explain. So HRV can change based on your fitness level, your menstrual cycle, your sleep, even how much caffeine you drink. And so it's less about, again, comparing the number to seeing the pattern for you. So especially looking at how quickly your heart rate variability returns back to normal. So your HRV, if it dips after an argument, but then bounces back the next day, that's a really good sign. Versus your HRV dips after an argument and stays low for a couple of days after. That means your body is not recovering from that stressful argument as well. Okay, so we covered heart rate variability, we covered hormones. What did John Gottman find in his lab? What are the other things that are important? So his team identified 4 behaviors that predicted divorce with 70 to 80% accuracy, and in some of their studies, up to 91% accuracy. These behaviors are criticism, contempt, stonewalling, and defensiveness. Okay, he called them the Four Horsemen. Of the Four Horsemen, contempt they found to be the most destructive. Gottman defined contempt as criticism mixed with a sense of superiority. So, in a relationship, in conflict, acting like I am better than you. Okay. So what does that look like? That looks like sarcasm, eye rolling, maybe mocking, maybe you're belittling. So when he saw this, he predicted that the relationship would not last and would eventually end in a breakup. Why is contempt so dangerous? Because contempt isn't just how you behave, isn't just you hurting somebody else's feelings. Not that that's okay. That's also not okay. But contempt is eroding at the level of trust and respect. Okay. And so that makes your hormones off, drives your cortisol up, drives inflammation, and really puts a physiological stressor on your body. And Gottman calls contempt the single biggest predictor of divorce. So, to answer our earlier question, can science predict if your relationship lasts? And really, the answer is in many ways it can. They can look at cortisol levels, looking at heart rate variability, looking at behaviors during fights, looking for the four horsemen, right? Criticism, contempt, defensiveness, and stonewalling. So now what? Prediction isn't fate. right? So being able to predict if a relationship is not doing well is one thing. But the good news is that you and me, knowing that these behaviors exist, that your body has physiological signals that it sends and it does when it's stressed, is really important. And counteracting that, doing things to counteract that, is going to be equally as important, so that really we can go against the physiology, help the physiology calm down. So let's talk about exactly how we can, what things we can do to protect our relationships. And so Gottman also identified seven simple principles that were practices that could protect your relationship. I want to cover four, and they are easier than you think. So number one is called soften your startup. The way that you start a hard conversation often will determine how it ends. Imagine you want to talk about money. So you want to talk about money and you come to your partner and you say, "You're always spending so much." That's going to cause the other person to be defensive, right? They're not going to be like, "Let me hear you out." They're going to say, "I'm not spending so much, you're spending so much," and then you have a fight on your hands. So what Gottman says is the way you start or approach, especially a difficult subject, is going to determine how you end that conversation, right? Are you going to amp things up right away, or are you going to find a way to ease into the conversation? So he talks about softening the startup. So instead of saying, "You're spending too much," you can say, "I am worried about our money. Can we have 20 minutes tonight to really talk about it?" And the other person is likely to say, "Man, I've been kind of worried about it too. I didn't know how to bring it up. Definitely, let's sit down today and look at everything." So, see how differently that ends? So, the way that you start a conversation will really highly determine how the conversation will end. So, using a gentle startup or a softer startup lowers the other person's need to respond and be defensive, and your stress hormones don't peak as high. Okay, what else? So Gottman found that you can also make repair attempts. What are repair attempts? Repairs are little signals that we send in the middle of a conversation or in the middle of even a disagreement, for the fight or disagreement not to continue to spiral. So it could be humor, it could be a gentle touch on the shoulder, it could be simply saying, "Hey, I don't like how I said that. Let me try that again." Okay. And so couples who respond to each other's repairs calm down faster, they have lower stress, and are far more likely to stay together. That's what their research shows. Okay, number three, churning towards. So churning towards or churning away. So churning towards is something that Gottman noticed mostly in everyday life. So in everyday life, we bid for each other's attention. What does that mean? We show our partner a video, or we text them something funny, or we touch them, or maybe our partner is sitting there and does a big sigh. And you're like, "Uh-oh, I think something's wrong." So we have a choice in that moment. Are we going to turn towards them, and are we going to, engage with them, or are we going to completely ignore them? They're like, "Oh, here, come here, let me show you something funny." And instead of going towards them, you walk out of the room. So that's turning away. Or turning towards, you walk towards them and listen to their joke or watch the thing that they're wanting to share. And so turning towards instead of ignoring or turning away builds trust. And those little moments build up your emotional bank, so that when you do have a conflict potentially, it's easier because your emotional bank is full, and you kind of have a bunch of reserves saying that this person continuously turns towards me and this conflict doesn't define our relationship. And what they found is in relationships that last, couples turn towards each other about 86% of the time. So that's a high number, but it's also not 100%, right? We miss bids for attention. We're busy, we're pulled in different directions, but 86% of the time is still quite a high number. And couples that ended up in divorce or ended up in a breakup turned towards each other 33% of the time. So that's still not zero, but a significantly lower amount. Okay. And number four, that technique to really help keep your relationship strong and healthy is soothe yourself. So when you are physiologically flooded, let's say you're having a disagreement and you're really amped up, your heart rate is high, your blood pressure is high, you feel like you're on edge, right? You're about to fight. You're about to fight. Fight with your words. You're not really controlling what you're saying. That's really not a time that your body can make rational decisions, that your brain can make decisions. You want to be defensive, you want to defend your position. And so, what Gottman talks about is in those moments, take a 20-minute break. Take a 20-minute break, either go for a walk, do some deep breathing, maybe do a meditation, and then come back calmer to that same conversation. It lets your body reset and then come back. And in the 20 minutes, you're not writing a list of what I'm going to say. Ooh, I'm going to tell him. I'm going to tell him this too. And you're not writing, right? You're using the 20 minutes to help your body calm down so that you can do a better job and be more rational and hear the other person out. And so that recovery window is what allows your cortisol to drop, your nervous system to calm down, and so the conversation doesn't spiral. So we talked about Gottman's tools, turning towards self-soothing, making repairs, and using a soft startup. So those are all great examples of how to approach conflict in a better way and how to feed your relationship and really put more into your emotional bank. All of these tools will help us have strong relationships and keep our stress hormones low and our physiology calm. If you like this video, I think you're going to really like the video that I talk about in here. I'll link it up above. And it is a 20 to 60-second way to help reset your nervous system. And it could also be another tool that we use in everyday life to help decrease our stress. I'm so glad that you're here. Thank you for taking the time, and I will see you in my next video.